Your Grace, Mar Andrews Tharth, he mentioned he had to leave for another function. His Excellency Mar Tony Nilankavil, who said such very kind words just a few minutes ago. Mr. ST.Thomas, President of the Old Students Association. Dr. K.L. Joy, Principal. Father Varghese Kutur, Mr. C.A. Francis. Teachers, students, friends. I hope that covers everybody. Ellarkkum ende vinidamaya namaskaram. I have to apologize at the very start, not just for being a bit late because of other functions on the way, but because unfortunately I have a very nasty cough and cold, and I've had to start antibiotics yesterday, so I'm not at my best form, and I might be coughing through my statements, so don't be too alarmed. But I will say a few words, and I'd be very happy if any of you want to take a couple of questions as well. But I understand the afternoon being late, you will all have to wrap this up. So I'm going to try and be brief and focused on the very important topic you've given me, the Indian Constitution. The fact is that our Constitution is a remarkable document. It was adopted, it was agreed, first of all, on the 26th of November 1949, after almost 3 years of serious deliberation beginning in 46, before independence. And when it was concluded, it was actually the longest constitution in the world. It had thought of everything. It had tried to cover a vast amount of ground. The framers had read and been inspired by many of the constitutions in the world. They had applied those principles effectively to the Indian context. And when the Constitution came into force on the 26th of January 1950, which we hail as Republic Day, it became the document by which our future democracy, the land that we now knew as the Republic of India, would be guided and run. Why 26th of January when the debates concluded 2 months earlier? There's an interesting history to that. In 1930, at its Karachi session, the Congress Party had declared independence, Purna Swaraj, for the first time on January 26, 1930. And so, ever thereafter, the Indian National Congress movement celebrated 26 January as Independence Day, as Purna Swaraj. 17 years later, Lord Mountbatten, in unseemly haste, accelerated the intended departure of the British from the middle of 1948 to August 15, 1947. So August 15 became our real Independence Day. But the Congress didn't want to lose the symbolism of Purna Swaraj on January 26th. So when the Constitution was agreed and adopted, the leadership of the country said, let us not lose the magic of that special day. We will celebrate the Constitution on Republic Day. And that's why Republic Day is the 26th of January. I tell you the story because when the BJP came to power under Narendra Modi, they were anxious to deny this famous history of January 26th. And so they started celebrating a new occasion, November 26, as Constitution Day, because it was the day when the drafting committee of the Constitution actually presented the Constitution to the Constituent Assembly. It seems a trivial thing to talk about today, but in these small details, you get a sense of the attitude of the present government, both to the Constitution itself and to everything associated with it, even something as symbolic as the date with which it is commemorated as Republic Day. Well, our Constitution, as I said earlier, has everything. It is a preamble which is binding and inalienable, which cannot be changed, which begins with "We the people of India." So it's not a constitution, as some wanted, adopted in the name of God or in the name of any sacred text. It's adopted in the name of the people. It is your constitution. And the constitution contains some unusual features that other constitutions don't have. In addition to the actual constitution itself, which covers all the predictable ground, including defining the union, who's a citizen, the rights, the duties, all of that, it includes a section called the Directive Principles of State Policy, where the Constitution seeks to lay down for the benefit of any future government the spirit and the ethos within which it must conduct the policy of the Indian state. So the Directive Principles of State Policy include a lot of things that are not binding because they're only principles and they're not actual binding obligations on the state government, but they're there. And it's interesting that such a document exists because it's one more reflection of the great liberality, openness, and humanity that the framers of the Constitution brought into the spirit of its writing. The defining features of the Constitution were clear for all to see, though the word secular was only added by the 42nd Amendment in 1976. Secularism was embedded in the Constitution in every other respect, without the word, because it was a Constitution that rested fundamentally on the principle of equality, a Constitution that said not only that every citizen of India would be equal, but that whatever your caste, your creed, your religion, your region, your language, your faith, you not only had the right to be yourself, but being who you were did not in any way derogate from your fundamental rights as a citizen of India. That was the magic of the Indian constitutional principle, and it was with that magic that the Constitution extended its application for 72 years, creating a nation of laws, creating a nation of equal citizens, creating a nation of freedom of religion, worship, and propagation of religion, creating a nation that became an example to the world of the successful management of diversity, and not just routine diversity, perhaps the most astonishing diversity seen on this planet, where we have snow peaks and tropical jungles, we have deserts and we have seas and rivers, we have people as dark as Africans and as fair as Europeans and as high cheekboned as Chinese, all coexisting in one political space, where we have people who have invented at least 4 systems of classical dance, at least 4, I was going to say 5, but let's say 4 major religions, and encouraged the followers of 4 or 5 others to find homes and thrive and flourish in India. A land which in so many ways has enshrined diversity that the Constitution itself recognizes 23 languages. And as I once joked, we are a society which has at least 400 ways of cooking the potato. And it's not even as if the potato is an Indian vegetable. It only came into India after the Portuguese brought it in from Latin America 500 years ago. So we are looking at a country of astonishing diversity with great success in managing that diversity until today. Today, as has been said by His Excellency Tony Nilankavil, the Constitution appears to be under threat as never before. We have gone through difficult times in our politics. Even though my own party was responsible for the emergency, I'm not personally an admirer of the emergency. I think it was morally wrong and politically disastrous. But it was constitutional. The provisions under which the emergency was declared were present within the Constitution of India. What we're seeing today, however, seems to be a fundamental assault on the Constitution itself, as well as on the spirit of its working. What do I mean by that? Let me take you a little back in time. Why did our nationalist movement, our freedom struggle, split? It split not on ideological grounds. It didn't split on Marxists versus capitalists. Not on geographical grounds. It didn't split on northerners versus southerners. It split on one principle and one principle alone. Should religion be the determinant of nationhood? And those who believe that their religion determined their nationhood, that is, those who advocated the idea of Pakistan, they formed a separate country called Pakistan. That was the idea of Pakistan. Whereas everybody else, starting with Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, who was president of the Congress from 1940 to 45, Dr. Ambedkar, every other leader you can care to think of from the freedom struggle, they all said, no, our freedom struggle was for everybody. We have fought for everybody's freedom, and we will keep and preserve a free country for everybody, and we will write a constitution that enshrines the equality of everybody. And that's what they did. That's what we're talking about today. But one set of people rejected that idea. V.D. Savarkar, the proponent of the Hindutva theory, the long-serving Sarsang Chalak, the leader of the RSS from 1940 to 1973, M.S. Golwalkar, and the President, General Secretary and President of the Bharatiya Jan Sangh Party, established by the RSS, Deen Dayal Upadhyay, they all rejected the Constitution of India from the very start. They said this Constitution is deeply flawed. They said it is flawed because it encapsulates a territorial idea of nationalism. The Constitution, it says, assumes that there is a territory called India, and it's written for all the people on that territory. Wrong, they all said. A people is not, a nation is not a territory. A nation is a people, and the people of India are only the Hindu people. This must be a Hindu Rashtra, a Hindu country, and everybody else is either a guest or an interloper who has broken in to our country. That was their philosophy, and they wrote it in great detail. In my book, Why I'm a Hindu, I have quoted extensively from the writings of these ideologues of the Hindutva movement to explain how fundamentally the roots of Hindutva are against the Constitution of India. And what these people then did, very simply, was to argue that there was an entire ideological basis for their rejection of the Constitution, that it was not authentic enough in the Indian ethos, that the only authentic Indian ethos is the Hindu ethos. Hindutva, according to its original theorist Savarkar, meant that only those people whose Matrabhumi was India, whose Pitrabhumi, the land of their ancestors, was India, and whose Punyabhumi, their holy land, was in India, only they were Hindus and only they were entitled to this country, whereas that would, by extension of that definition, encompass not only Hindus but also Buddhists, Jains, Sikhs, because they all have their Matrabhumi, Pitrabhumi and Punyabhumi here. The Muslims and the Christians, and for that matter the Jews, would automatically be excluded because their Punyabhumi is somewhere else. And on that basis, the ideologues of this movement, which comprise everybody who has ever taken a course of instruction in the RSS or the Vishwa Hindu Parishad or the Bajrang Dal, are essentially the family of organizations known as the Sangh Parivar. They remain unreconciled to the liberal, accommodative constitution that enshrines equality. And this is the context against which you must see what has happened with the Citizenship Amendment Bill. The bill itself, as the government keeps pleading, is only meant to benefit persecuted minorities in 3 neighboring countries. That's still not a good enough answer, because the fact is that the principle of the bill is wrong, since nowhere in the history of the Indian Constitution has a religious test been prescribed for citizenship until this bill, which identifies only specific religious denominations that can qualify. The second problem of principle is why these religions and why these countries? First, BJP said it was to complete the unfinished business of partition. That explains Bangladesh and Pakistan. But why Afghanistan? Then they said it's only persecuted minorities. But are there not persecuted minorities in other countries? Have we not seen the Rohingyas of Myanmar? Myanmar was part of India till 1935. Have we not seen the persecuted minorities, the Rohingyas, coming here? They don't get refugee status in this country. What about the Sri Lankan Hindus, the Sri Lankan Tamils, Hindus, Muslims and Christians, who have been persecuted in Sri Lanka during the bad years there and have been in Tamil Nadu for 20 years? Is the government not prepared to extend the same benefits to them? The answer is no. Why not? Even though a majority of them are Hindus? But this government of the BJP is only interested in Hindi-speaking Hindus. So that too doesn't work. So there is no logical consistency to the argument in this bill. And to imply that in Muslim majority countries a Muslim cannot be persecuted is wrong. We have given refuge to Taslima Nasreen, to Dawood Haider, writers and intellectuals who had to flee Bangladesh. We have given refuge to Ahmadiyyas and Shias from Pakistan, Hazaras from Afghanistan, who are all Muslim in our constitution, all Muslim under our laws, but who are persecuted in those countries. So why should we restrict ourselves only to non-Muslims? The short answer is it's part of a continuing project to create a Hindu Rashtra and to disenfranchise Muslims. Let me say that the Citizenship Amendment Bill, now Act, is only the thin end of the wedge. The larger part of the wedge is yet to come, and that can be found in Mr. Amit Shah, the Home Minister's statement in Parliament, that we will have a nationwide National Register of Citizens. What is that? Every Indian citizen is going to be asked to demonstrate their eligibility for Indian citizenship by producing documentation issued by a reputed government body that shows when and where they were born. Well, in Kerala, most of you won't have a problem. But in the rest of the country, many parts of India, till quite recently, birth certificates were not that common. Particularly poor Indians, rural Indians, slum dwellers, minorities, marginalized people do not have the documentation to show that they were born in India on such and such a date. Even Mr. Modi's Council of Ministers has a minister who was Army Chief, V.K. Singh, who went to court claiming that he didn't have an authentic birth certificate and the date given in his school admission was wrong. So when you're in a country where so many people don't have convincing proof of date of birth and place of birth, how can you make that a test for citizenship in our country? A lot of people will fail this test. We know that already in Assam. What happened in Assam? They conducted a register of citizens there and they found 19 lakh people ineligible, more than half of whom were not Muslims. So this bill is designed to exempt those who get trapped by the National Register of Citizens. Those people will be told, it's okay, under the Citizenship Act, you can stay. But if you are Muslim, you don't qualify under the Citizenship Act. Now imagine what happens tomorrow if somebody living in Bombay is brought before a National Register of Citizens, has no documentation. He or she will be told, sorry, how can you prove you're not from Bangladesh? And they will say, but I'm born here, my parents are born here, my grandparents are born here. And they will say, well, show us your birth certificate, and many people won't have it. It will become an excuse to strip them of their citizenship, of their voter identity card, of their job, their homes, their rights in this country. And the BJP government has already begun building internment camps to house all these people because they cannot be deported since no neighboring country wants to accept them, but they will be essentially stripped of all the meaningful rights that they are entitled to enjoy as citizens of India. And I say to the non-Muslims in this room, is that acceptable to us? Can we stand idly by while this disenfranchisement takes place in our Muslim brothers and sisters? I ask you, are you prepared to accept that? Are you prepared to accept this injustice? Then you are standing for our Constitution, because our Constitution does not provide for this injustice. Our Constitution respects everyone equally. How somebody turns to worship their idea of the divine is their business. They can stretch their hands out to God, they can bow 5 times a day, they can do the sign of the cross, they can smear their forehead with ash, they can conduct archanas in a temple. That is entirely their business and not the business of the state. And that is the core principle of the Constitution that is under threat today. I am not talking about a word like secular, I'm talking about a spirit, the spirit of equality, the spirit of diversity, the spirit of Indianness. So today the young people of St. Thomas's College have to look at the Constitution of India and have to contemplate what it means for them. I would ask you each to imagine the face of your Muslim classmate. Imagine the face of your Muslim friend, your favorite Muslim actor, your favorite Muslim sportsman, and say, am I more equal than he or she is? Does that person have a smaller entitlement to breathe the free air of this country, to say with pride that they are Indian than I do? I know you will all say no, because you have been brought up in the right values of this state, of this college, of this country, and of this Constitution. Let us safeguard those values. Let us fight to preserve the Constitution of India. Let us keep India free. Jai Hind. Thank you. I hope the students have a mic also. Iniki matram mic is nowhere. Okay, you've got a mic. Tell me who you are, what you're studying, where you're from.
Sir, I'm Afla from ST.Thomas College, HSS. I'm currently pursuing +2 studies and my question is, Rajya Sabha plays a major role in legislation, but very often nominated members are decided by the party in power. What is your opinion in considering educational qualifications as criteria for such nominations?
I agree entirely with you. I think there's something wrong with a system where politicians who are either not popular enough to get elected or can't be bothered to contest an election are coming into the upper house to act as elder statesmen and wise people and maintain such a control over the workings of the upper house of the party. I agree with you, that is wrong. I think politicians should get the support of the voters, and the upper house should consist of ideally people with a different kind of expertise, higher education, professional qualifications. Perhaps you could have specific interest groups that are otherwise underrepresented. You could have, for example, a larger proportion of women members, since the Lok Sabha does not always elect enough women. We only have 11% of the Lok Sabha is full of women. We could have more reserved in the Rajya Sabha. The Rajya Sabha should be qualitatively different from the Lok Sabha. The alternative is to go the American route. The American route started off like ours, where the upper house, the Senate, was elected by people from the state assemblies in America. But in the early 19th century, they shifted to direct election. And so the main thing is, in the Senate in the US, every state has the same number of senators, 2 senators per state. Whether you're a small state or a big state, you have 2 senators. And those 2 senators are elected by everybody. So they also have political credibility because they were elected. So I would say one of the two options, either your option, education, professional qualification, gender, some specialization, that makes them truly a house of elders, or direct election that makes them truly a house of politicians. It should not be a free pass for defeated politicians to have a comfortable 6 years in Parliament.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Safna Wike, and I'm from St. Mary's College, Thrissur.
Hi.
My question is a little bit different. The next UN Secretary General from Asia will be in 2046, if my knowledge is correct.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Can we hope for India achieving a permanent seat on the Security Council by then? And if we fail to do so, should we even nominate a candidate for the same?
Well, if we fail to do so, I hope the UN will still be around then, because my worry is that without reforming the Security Council, the UN will be seen as more and more and more irrelevant with the passage of time. And if the UN wants its decisions to be respected by countries, it needs to have the legitimacy that comes from being a truly representative body. Right now, it's a body that reflects the geopolitical realities of 1945. Will that still be relevant in 2045? I don't think so. So I'm hoping that reform will come and we will get into the Security Council. But if it doesn't come and we don't, and the UN is still there, then we should certainly put forward a candidate. So you start preparing now.
Good afternoon, sir. I am Devargis from Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, Puttur.
Hi.
I am currently studying in 9th. I have a question for you. Center-state relations are now in a state of transformation. 7th schedule of our constitution clearly delineate the subjects of administration. Do you support the move for amending the 7th schedule?
You know, I haven't thought enough about it. So let me take a pass. I tend to take my politics and my responsibilities in Parliament very seriously. So before I take a view on something like amending the Constitution or one particular part of the Constitution, I feel I should study it more before giving you an answer. So forgive me for not answering now, but I'll promise you one thing, I'll look at it very carefully before the next session of Parliament and come up with a considered position. And if I have a chance to speak, I'll say this young man from ST.Thomas, from Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan in Thrissur reminded me that I need to study this issue. So here is my point of view. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Neerav. I'm from Nirmal Mala Central School. I'm currently in class 12. Firstly, congratulations on the Sahitya Academy Award.
Thank you.
Sir, my question to you is, what is your opinion about the Centre's decision to revoke Article 370 of the Constitution? And do you think it will be beneficial for Kashmiris and Kashmir in the long run?
Well, in the short run, it certainly isn't. It's been disastrous. As I said in Parliament when they proposed that decision, and I voted against it, and I spoke very strongly against it that day, I pointed out, first of all, even if they're able to persuade the Supreme Court, which they have not yet done, that it was respectful of the letter of the law, it did not respect the spirit of either the law, the Constitution, or of Indian democracy. Why? Because every principle embedded in this has been violated. It says you must consult the legislature of Kashmir. The legislature of Kashmir is suspended. So instead they asked the governor of Kashmir, whom they themselves were appointed, and he said yes. So it's like getting your own consent to do what you want, number one. Number two, instead of a debate in the assembly, they had a debate in the parliament where they already know they have a crushing majority and they would get their way. Number three, thank you. They have locked up all the elected leaders of Kashmir. People who had been winning elections for 20, 30 years found themselves under house arrest at the time of this decision. So there was no democratic process involved. And number four, the people were not given a choice or a chance to express their views either. They cut off the internet, they cut off telephone lines, they imposed a curfew, they put soldiers on the streets, and they paralyzed normal life there. You ask about whether it will be of long-term benefit. The short term, it has destroyed the principal revenue source of Kashmir, which is tourism, because tourists were all pulled out of the valley. Even the Amarnath Yatra was cancelled. And the result is that one of the major lifelines for Kashmir is gone. Secondly, thanks to curbing the internet, one of the most successful economic endeavors in Kashmir, which was selling Kashmiri handicrafts, artisan work, carpets and so on the internet, online, to global customers, that has been destroyed because people cannot receive or fulfill orders anymore. It has been terrible for the economy, terrible for the morale of the people, and terrible for tourism. So there is absolutely no benefit I can see from it whatsoever, other than the fulfillment of this very narrow-minded, bigoted, particularist agenda by the government that we have. In the long term, what could happen? Well, first of all, as I have said repeatedly, let them lift all the restrictions on the lockdown and let people express their views freely. Let them have a chance to show how they feel about this. My impression is that even Kashmiris who are loyal to India have now been alienated and are bitter. I fear that this will be the gesture that will cause us more short and long-term damage and will damage irreparably the relationship between Kashmir and the rest of India like nothing else has. I'm not happy at all about it. I've made my views very clear, but time will tell whether my pessimism is borne out or the blithe optimism of the ruling party.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Smriti Haridas. I am a student of class 12 at Harishri Vidyanidhi. My question is, as the author of An Era of Darkness, what is your opinion on the legacy that has been left in India by colonialism? And do you still believe that the British have to pay compensation for the sufferings of the Indian people?
Thank you. Well, on the compensation, I have actually taken a slightly heretical view. I did have to debate that at Oxford. So, because the topic was about reparations, what I said was that you cannot put a monetary value on the damage done by the British. You cannot put a monetary value not just on the trillions of dollars drained out of India, but on the 35 million lives lost because of unnecessary famines caused and prolonged by British policy. So how do you put a value on a life? So I said, since any payable amount would not be credible and any credible amount would not be payable, you just give a symbolic £1 a year for the next 200 years, and that'll be a way of saying sorry. But of course, no finance ministry can administer such a scheme. So it's not the compensation, in my view, that matters. Recently, a professor in London, of Indian origin, Professor Ursa Patnaik, calculated that the total British drain of wealth from India was, in today's money, 45 trillion pounds sterling. Since the entire GDP of Britain is only 3 trillion, you're talking about 15 years worth of GDP. How can you ever ask for that back? It'll never happen. My advice is forget it. But the overall legacy, you have to read my book. I cannot tell you in 2 minutes what I've spent 300 odd pages spelling out. But it's been a devastatingly negative legacy. And amongst the very few good things that we've got from it is this language in which we are able to communicate nationwide. But if it wasn't for the Brits, it would probably have been Marathi with the Marathas or Persian with the Mughals. We would have had a language. It's not that language itself is a great asset. I happen to love the English language. That's a language I grew up learning and reading and speaking. But you and I could be speaking something else. It wouldn't change anything. The fundamental thing is, what has it done to our civilization, to our prosperity, to the well-being of our people? What institutions has it left us with, and what problems has it caused for us over the years? And there my book will tell you the picture is not a pretty one.
Good evening, sir. My name is Shreyas CS. I'm from Pameka Vidya Mandir, studying in +2. The question I wanted to ask you is that, what is your opinion on the intellectual brain drain that is a phenomenon in India? And what would you suggest to, what would be your opinion and how can we prevent it?
Well, there is some dispute now as to whether the brain drain is genuinely a loss for the country. There used to be a much worse brain drain when I was your age, because in the 60s, for example, and the 70s, the entire graduating class of the IITs and the IIMs would go abroad and never come back. In fact, Silicon Valley has flourished on the backs of these boys and girls trained in the IITs established in the 60s and 70s. So if you were to look at that, that was a colossal brain drain. Today, that is not happening nearly so much. Perhaps half the class is going, but more than half of those are coming back. So that's the first thing. Secondly, even that brain drain, the people who went actually remained affectionately committed to India. They became an asset to India in their new countries. For example, the Indian-American lobby is hugely influential in America in supporting a politics that is sympathetic to India in America. And that's become something that's an asset to us, not a drain or a loss. And again, many of them have invested back in India. They brought money into setting up institutions in Bangalore and Chennai and so on, which have actually become rather significant efforts. For example, in the IT sector, a lot of the seed money for initial ventures in business process offshoring and technological support operations here for foreign companies came from Indians based abroad who were once part of the brain drain, but their money coming into India has made it a brain gain. So I would challenge the question of whether we really have a big problem there. I would of course be happy if many Indians went abroad, learned skills, learned practices, understood the best that's available internationally, and then came back to India to serve us. I've done that myself. I had 34 years abroad before coming here, and I believe I have a good sense of what India can aspire to. I have seen that we are in no way inferior. Our human resources, our brain power, our discipline, our hard work is no way inferior to what you see and what you can see in the most successful countries in the world. Our failings are usually in our systems, in our politics, in our corruption. These are things we need to overcome from within. But I certainly do not feel, having come back to India, that we have a major brain drain problem. I think in a democracy, those who wish to go, you should let them go. But I'm convinced they will remain loyal and affectionate to our country.
Namaste, sir. My name is Rohan, and I'm from Bhavan Spuchati.
Hi.
So before I proceed with the question, I would like to congratulate you on your reception of the Sahitya Academy Award for your book, Era of Darkness.
Thank you.
So my question is, what is your opinion on the recent Operation Disha in Telangana?
Which operation was that? Oh, you mean the killing of those?
Yes.
I think it was shameful. I said so at the time. You see, the whole process about running a country on the basis of rule of law is that justice is done when all possibility of injustice is eliminated. Maybe these fellows were the criminals, maybe they were the rapists, maybe they deserve the worst. But that should be established through due process of law. The police should have the opportunity to assemble the evidence, present it in court, give these people a chance to tell their side of the story, and then if the judge believes that a convincing case has been made, then they can be sentenced. That was what happened in the Nirbhaya case in Delhi. Here, these fellows had no chance to defend themselves, and the police had no obligation to do the painstaking legwork of accumulating the evidence. As I said at the time, if indeed these fellows were trying to mount an armed escape, it's possible the police were legally justified in shooting. But short of that, you can't just shoot suspects. First of all, this would be no longer democratic, modern state of the 21st century. It would be the Wild West, like the sheriffs and the cowboys going out to get alleged cattle rustlers. That kind of thing, the lynch mobs, the vigilantism, we don't want that in our country in the 21st century. So my answer is that you really need an absolutely democratic system. In turn, the public must understand their tempers may be boiling over, they may be very angry. But tomorrow, their tempers may boil over against somebody who is unjustly accused. And in those circumstances, we would all have the blood of an innocent person on our hands if he shot in a police encounter and it later turns out he was innocent. So that's why due process of law is extremely important, and I would urge people not to let their understandable emotions and passions get carried away. Now, to make matters worse, I happen to be against the death penalty anyway. I believe that the state should not reduce itself to the level of killers. That's a minority view, so I won't press that. But even if you have the death penalty, it can only be delivered, as the Supreme Court said, after due process, after hearing, after all appeals are exhausted, and then too only in the rarest of rare cases. You know that even where people have been sentenced to death, for the last 18 months, the Supreme Court has not allowed any executions to happen. And why is that? Because they're saying it should be the rarest of rare. We should be satisfied it's the rarest of rare cases. So let's not be too trigger happy. That's unworthy of us as a democracy. That'll have to be the last question, because I'm now beginning to reach the end of my energy levels with the antibiotics I'm taking and the cough and cold and battling. So come on, the lady gets the last word.
Sir, myself Shobha Vasan from ST.Thomas College. My question for you is, sir, do you think India is mature enough to enact the provision of recalling elected members in a constitution?
Recalling?
Recalling elected members.
I don't think that will be very healthy, frankly, because the problem is very simple. Every single elected member does not necessarily have a majority of the votes. I myself have 42, 43%. So there are many MPs and MLAs who have come in with 30-odd%. Now, if you have any issue on which temporarily the public is angry, the person already has a majority against him. And you would find it very easy to recall MPs. It create chaos in our democracy. And the next person to get elected may even have a lower percentage. So if you recall an MP with 43% like me, by getting the other 57% to vote against him, tomorrow you may get an MP winning with 35%, and you'll be stuck with somebody who's even less popular. I think the best thing to do in a system like ours, where we have multiple parties and a first-past-the-post system, is to exercise our vote judiciously, but once we have done it, we have to live with the consequences till the next election. It's bad enough that in our country we have elections somewhere or the other every 6 months. Let's not add one more now recall election to the mix. If you don't mind, I'm not going to support that idea. All right, well, thank you all very much. It's been a very enjoyable afternoon. Take care. Jai Hind.
Good afternoon, sir. I am Sushila from class 10, doing it Don Bosco Higher Secondary School, Manuti. My question was, what is your opinion about Citizenship Amendment Act 2019? Since you have answered, I have another question, and that is, right to property was a fundamental right, and it is taken away recently. What is your opinion about that?
Okay, so Citizenship Amendment Act, I've already answered. You've heard my answer. On the right to property, there was a judgment of the Supreme Court in the 1970s, not recently, that said it can be circumscribed in the interests of the state. And that's particularly because sometimes the state wants to have the right to break up large estates, zamindari rights, and so on, and also to take over land for projects of public benefit, highways, airports, roads, ports, and so on. And they don't want the right to private ownership to obstruct them. But though the right has thereby been limited or circumscribed, it has not been absolutely taken away. Tomorrow some policeman can't come to you and say, give me your watch because you don't have the right to property. That is still theft. You see what I'm saying? So it's only in certain well-defined circumstances that the state, the government, can take a considered view that your home is standing in the way of an important development that will benefit lakhs of people. Therefore, the government has the right to take over your home, and you do not have an absolute right to property, but the government has to compensate you for the value of your home and perhaps find you a land somewhere else to build another home. That much has to be done. But you don't have to worry about anybody arbitrarily taking away your, your property. That's certainly not something which I would be in favor of. Anybody would favor. Everybody has a right to property, but the only difference is under our system, and because of Supreme Court judgments, that right to property is circumscribed in the interests of public welfare and of the state. Okay, that young man had one last question, is it? Okay, go ahead. I have been bribed with a cup of coffee. I may as well answer yours while having it.
Hi, sir. I'm Edwin John from the Department of Physics, St.Thomas College, Thrissur. So, sir, I'm a big fan of your English diction and your speeches.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you. So, maybe I'm the odd one out of the 10 questions. So, you are also known for your rich, vibrant vocabulary. So, is using an unfamiliar word a better choice than using 2 or 3 non-words instead? Thank you, sir. And I would also like to make a bit extension to this question. That is, in your opinion, what would be a best alternative for the term sir? Sir, thank you.
Both are very good questions. On the first one, I've always said the purpose of using language is to communicate. So if you use words that nobody can understand, you are not successful in communicating. Which means that if I have used a word that literally doesn't get my message across, I have failed. It's not something to be proud of if I've used 10 words and 8 of them no one understands. So the important thing is to use language people know. Now, my problem is perhaps that I know too many words. And this whole controversy started when I got very angry with a certain notorious television anchor. And I wrote a tweet which I genuinely did not think had any difficult words. These were all words I've been using from my college days and college debates and so on. So I said an outrageous farrago of misrepresentations and outright lies broadcast by, a performer or something masquerading as a journalist, a showman masquerading as a journalist. Now, I didn't think any of those words was difficult, but it turned out that the Oxford English Dictionary reported the next day that there was a world record in the number of searches for the meaning of the word farrago from Indian users. And so I suddenly realized that this became, now of course in India it became a big joke and people started calling me Mr. Farrago and opening accounts on social media calling themselves Farrago and so on, which I can laugh about. My idea was to convey that I was furious with the lies that this person was telling, and it did have that effect, even if the word itself needed to be looked up. But then sometimes, because I've developed this outsized reputation for using unusual words, I also enjoy the joke at my own expense a little bit. So, for example, when I was launching my then new book, The Paradoxical Prime Minister, rather than just announcing that I'm publishing a new book, which would have got a modest amount of attention and that's all, I said if I use an unusual word, everybody will sit up and pay attention. And so I tweeted, my new book, The Paradoxical Prime Minister, is more than just a 500-page exercise in floxinosi nihilipilification. And that immediately got everybody. Now, of course, the spin-off effect is that various parents started teaching their 3-year-old children to say floxinosi nihilipilification, which I think may or may not last as a fad. It's a funny way of saying that something is worthless. Floxinosi nihilipilification is the act of estimating something or someone as worthless. That's the purpose of that word. But to be very honest, it's a joke to use a word like that. You don't need to use, you can simply say somebody is worthless. So when you're using a big word for effect, be conscious of the unintended effect. Now, having said that, there are a lot of legitimate words used by serious writers in good books and good articles that many people don't know because they don't read enough. So I'm not embarrassed about using those words, and I would urge people to look up those words if they can't find them easily, because expanding your vocabulary is always an effective means of better communication. I've always said it's important to be able to communicate effectively and clearly, but sometimes the most appropriate word may not necessarily be the easiest word for the exact nuance you want to comply, right? You want to convey. So to say that something is sharp and to say that something is incisive mean both the same thing. But to say that that person's critique of this play was incisive conveys a certain way of being methodical, of being correct, as well as being sharp, whereas the word sharp merely says it was sharp, like a knife cutting through the play. So that's why incisive is a better word, even though they both mean the same thing. So use words on the judging their nuances, their context, and so on. And the only way you can figure out how the word is to be used is by reading a lot. The more you read, The more you come across these words in different texts, different books, different contexts, the more you'll appreciate how the word is to be used. As for sir, this is such an amazing Indian habit. Having lived abroad for so many years where no one says sir, except out of pure routine, you'll call a waiter sir. Sir, can I have another cup of coffee? You don't mean sir with a great deal of respect. It's just a way of saying, I don't know your name, so I'll call you something, I'll call you sir. When you write a letter saying, dear sir, to a junior officer, it doesn't mean that you are saying that they're senior to you. You're merely saying, dear sir, because you don't know their name. And in India, people are shocked when I, an MP, am writing to some clerk or some undersecretary and I say, dear sir, they say, how can you call him sir? You're the MP, you're the minister, whatever. I say, I don't know his name. You give me his name, I'll write, dear Mr. Sharma, dear Mr. Muhammad, or whatever. But if you don't know his name, the polite thing to do is call him sir. In India, it's not used like that. In India, it's always deferential. I was shocked to discover in the bureaucracy that people felt obliged, all the foreign service officers in my first ministry felt obliged to call their ministers sir. Even if we had been social friends and calling each other by first name since college, in the ministry suddenly I became sir. I found that very strange. It wouldn't happen in the Western world. Similarly, in our social life here, the reference to somebody, the way we say Gandhi ji, people go around saying, oh, Shashi sir, Padma Kumar sir. That is not English, that is Indian. That's very, very unusual. Anywhere else in the English-speaking world, no one does that. I think if you're speaking in India, if you want, add politely a G, particularly North India, that shows respect, or add a suffix that indicates respect like Chetan or Anna in Tamil, or Da in Bengali, or Bhai in Hindi. So you can refer to somebody, Saurav Bhai, so-and-so Bhai, or these very senior, call them Sahab. But this using sir, a word from the English language in a way that it is not meant to be used in the English language, I think is quite unnecessary. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, sirs and madams, thank you very much.
Thank you.